Welcome to the Power of Design podcast, where we have inspiring conversations that explore the intersection of architecture, construction, and real estate, so we can understand the dynamics and trends that shape an exciting and powerful built environment. This is your host, Jack Osa. In today's episode of The Power of Design, I will be talking with John Espey. John is a trailblazer. Having started and exited multiple technology companies, he is currently the CEO and co-founder of Defiance Ventures, a company that is building the future by partnering with investors and founders to create tech companies that focus on breakthrough digital services. I learned so much talking to John. His worldview and capacity to make things happen is amazing and inspiring. We talk about nutrition, building strong businesses, technology, and the future of design. This is my conversation with John. John, welcome to the Power of Design podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jack.
John, you have successfully started and sold multiple technology companies, which at least from my perspective is mind-blowing to conceive. How do you make that happen? What would you say is the single most important characteristic of a person who wants to do the same thing?
Be lucky.
Great. I'm going to make it.
No, I think if there's one important thing, it's to be able to balance a little bit of stubbornness with a little bit of open-mindedness. Stubbornness keeps you from quitting, and open-mindedness keeps you from going down with the ship and making the changes that you need to, because inevitably you're going to get something wrong and need to shift gears. And so really striking that balance between being determined and stubborn in a way and being open-minded.
Well, what do you think open-minded brings to people when they behave like that?
Well, I think when you're open-minded, you can really learn a lot. And I think you can learn a lot from those that are around you. So people always say, surround yourself with great people. If you surround yourself with great people, but you don't listen to them, you're not going to get the benefits of those people. I also think that being open-minded allows you to do the famous pivot. It's almost a cliche term, but I think to be successful in most businesses, you're going to have to be able to change course in a way that you might not have anticipated up front. And if you're so stubborn and so closed-minded to the way that you think is the right way to do it, you can miss opportunities.
Sure. And what about the technology world do you find exciting?
Well, for me, it's just how quickly it changes. And I like things changing quickly because I get bored with things. I like to learn new things, but I also like it changes quickly. So if you miss one thing, you don't have to worry. There's another big thing coming. And you see it all the time with companies. Sure. Google missed social, but caught up on mobile. Microsoft missed mobile, but was able to catch up on cloud. And so it's very interesting because when things are rapidly changing, it just creates a whole lot of opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great point. Tell me about you, John. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Northern Virginia. So I was born just outside of the city in Washington, D.C. And my family tried to outrun the sprawl. And eventually the sprawl won. And that's when I came to Charlotte. But I lived in D.C. all the way out to the suburbs of D.C.
And when you were growing up, did you ever think you were going to get into the technology world, or what were your dreams and aspirations at that time?
So I don't know what I thought I was going to do. I always thought that I would go out on my own from a very early age, but I don't know that I necessarily knew it would be technology until I was about 19, 20. I was working at a car stereo shop, and these two younger guys, older to me at the time, but younger guys in retrospect, pulled up in matching Mercedes and each spent $5,000 on stereo systems. And I'm like, holy shit. Ooh, I hope you don't mind me cursing on the podcast. I said, holy shit, what do you guys do? And they were like, oh, we're technology consultants. And so they started explaining the business to me. And I'd say that's when it really bit me. And then time and again, people would come in with really nice cars wanting to get stereos put in. And when I would ask them, they would say, we run a technology business. And so I remember seeing my dad one day and I'm like, Dad, I'm finishing school, so I can start a technology business.
That's awesome, man. That's a great way to just, see somebody that they have what you want and just learning like, okay, how do you get there? Because I want to do the same.
And it was very helpful growing up in the DC area because AOL was headquartered there. UUNet was headquartered there. MCI. The internet really, at the end of the day, starts in Northern Virginia. And I was living in Ashburn, Virginia, which is the epicenter of all of that, including AOL. And so there was just a lot of excitement. You saw a lot of people working on a lot of really exciting, cool stuff. And that, I think, helped to solidify my desire to get into technology.
Sure. So at that point, what did you do? Did you enroll in college and what?
So I was in undergrad at George Mason University. I'd started out as an accounting major. And then once I realized I wanted to get into technology, I asked what it would take to switch to computer science. And when they told me, I said, is there anything in the business school? I don't want to stick around for an extra 2 years and waste the classes that I've already gotten. So they told me about a new major called Decision Sciences and Management Information Systems. It wasn't as technical as computer science or electrical engineering, but it was technical enough. And that was one piece of it. The second piece was that I was working for a technology company as an accountant, a part-time accountant. And I was just in the right place at the right time. I overheard the tech guys talking about a problem that I'd been reading about in one of my other classes. And I told them, I think I could solve this for you. And they let me work on the problem for about an hour, and I figured it out for them. And the CIO was a lady named Kim. She pulled me to the side and she's like, what do you do here? And I was like, well, I stuff envelopes and I prepare expense reports. And she's like, you're going to come write code for me. And so that was a really, really big break for me because I got into an actual job where I was writing code and developing applications for a real technology business.
That's awesome. What do you think about writing code? It's a special when you need a special type of mind to do that. What is that mind like to be able to match with those skills?
Yeah. So I think there's a few different types of people who can be good at writing code. I think if you can step away from a problem and not look at your intuition, because a lot of times we use intuition to solve problems. That is not what you can do in programming. Programming is about what are the very methodical steps that you take to do something. And if you can step back and go into your slow brain, if you will, that solves problems that way and decompose it into how do I solve that problem, it's a whole lot easier to solve a problem. Surprisingly, I think you need to be pretty creative to be a coder. Not creative in the sense of I can paint pictures or I can do drawings or I can direct or I can do cinematography, but it's creative in terms of the way that you solve the problem.
Sure.
Every problem can be solved 20 different ways. It's how creative can you get, and then how can you identify which is the best long-term solution for solving that particular problem.
Sure. And I will think that your background, going to accounting first, that was a huge value when you decide to, start your own business. Because one thing is the technical side, what you do, but the other part is the business side. How do you manage money? How do you manage teams? How do you make things happen? I think there is a huge advantage you had having that experience.
There's no doubt. Look, if you can read a balance sheet and an income statement, you're going to be a better business person. And it helped me in terms of raising money. It helped me in terms of investing in companies. It helped me in terms of valuing projects. But it also just helps you to think about what is happening from a business perspective based on the decisions that you're making. I think the other part that helped me in terms of being able to launch businesses was that work I did in the stereo shop. I was designing systems for customers, convincing them we could do it, negotiating a price with them, and then overseeing the team that did the installation. And that doing a car stereo system doesn't seem that much like developing a software application. But it was funny because a friend of mine who had nothing to do with technology heard me talking one day about stereos back then. And he said, man, if you would just figure out how to do that with computers, you'd be a lot better off than doing that with stereos. I need to thank him next time I see him.
Oh, sure, man. That was a really, really good point. So you're at that job, excited, writing code. Tell me about that experience, what you learned, and what was the next step after that?
So what I really learned there, I worked on, as I recall, 4 or 5 different applications, and some were things that somebody else had built. Some were things that I was able to build. those are two different skills when it comes to developing code. I learned how to think on my feet. I remember that we had a database that a California state tax auditor was going through, and he had some questions about it. And that was very useful to me, just going through the database and seeing the different way that things are stored and structured and where mistakes were made and that sort of thing. So I got a lot of overall exposure to all sides of application development and looking at data and how it's actually used in a real world application.
Cool. And then how was your journey to the point where you decide to start your own company?
So I graduated from undergrad. I had looked at a couple of different companies. I had a couple different offers, and then I was told about a really hardcore development shop. I mean, they were working 70, 80 hours a week. They built barnesandnoble.com. They built parts of eBay. And once I talked to them, I was like, I have to get a job here. And luckily I went through the interview process, did very well. I was surrounded by people far smarter and far more educated than I was. And that was a lot of what excited me about going to this company. And so that's who I started with coming out of undergrad. And I worked there for 2.5 years. Watched that company. They were sold for $1 billion to a publicly traded company. And then the .com collapse happened, and I watched that company shrink. But I was very fortunate to always be on kind of cutting edge projects. And I learned a lot about real application development. The applications I was developing while I was in undergrad were a lot of internal applications that were useful, and I learned a lot, but they weren't products that the company was selling to somebody else or building for somebody else. And it's a whole different ballgame when you go build a piece of software as a consultant than when you're building something internally.
Sure.
And I didn't start a company after that, but I joined a startup. I joined an 8-person company. I was the 9th employee there. And that was really where I made the transition from I want to own a tech company to now I'm equipped to own a tech company. I worked for 7 years for that company. In year 5, we had grown from 8 people to 135. I was the chief operating officer. My responsibilities were much more commercial and business development, HR, that type of thing. And in 2008, we sold that business to Red Hat. So now I was working for a big publicly traded company, running their middleware consulting. I did that for a couple of years and then saw an opportunity to go help start a company, a product company that needed somebody with software background, somebody with sales background, and somebody with operational background. And I had all 3 of those because I was the COO of the company that I had joined as a startup. And so that was really, I didn't start that company, but I was part of the founding team. I put money into it. I structured much of the deal. We raised about $10 million. And after getting through raising about that $10 million, I decided I'd like to go out on my own. And I didn't know what I wanted to do on my own. So I did some independent consulting for a while. And then I had an idea for an application that I wanted to build, an iPhone app. And so at that point, I put some of my own money in, raised a little bit of money from friends, and built an application that I got on the App Store and eventually got it featured as the #1 finance category app, but never really figured out how to make money with it. And so at that point, I took what I had learned there and I said, well, I know how to run a consulting company. So I started a consulting company called Level. And that was really probably the biggest success of my career. I started that from day one, ran it for 5 years. We grew that to over 200 people operating in Australia, Asia, Europe, and America, and generating about $40 million a year in revenue before I stepped down from the day-to-day and sold some of my shares to go pursue the current company that I'm now running.
Yeah. Well, that sounds easy.
It always sounds better when you're looking in hindsight.
Sure.
Than when you're doing it coming at you.
I think that's how I started with my first question, because to me, when you tell that story, which is true and is real and it happened in my mind, is like mind blowing. It's like, wow, 5 years, this is crazy. And I think, one is technology makes that happen. I don't know if you can do that with any other type of businesses, but also your preparation, your specific journey, you were slowly getting equipped to get to that point where you could be a high performer at that level.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there. Something that's really, a lot of people don't realize. Most successful startups are started by people who are mid to late 30s, early 40s, maybe even into their 50s, because it just takes a lot of skills. And there are some exceptional people who can come out of undergrad or during undergrad and start a business and scale it. But most people who are successful build up skills and build their network and work in increasingly important roles and learning the things that it takes to successfully launch and scale a business.
Sure. Help me understand the concept of raising money. I hear that's something I've never done, but you always hear in the news, this company raised this $1 million and they raised this and that. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, what does that really mean?
Sure. And that's a great question. And it really depends on the stage where you're raising money. If you're starting a business with just an idea, you're probably going to put your own money in, and you may be able to convince a few of your family members to put money in. It's really hard if you've never started a business to go out and convince somebody else to give you money. It's just a very risky proposition. But that is a type of money raise. It's a friends and family round. It's just pass the hat around, Go call an attorney or somebody who's raised money before to put the legal documentation together. That's not what most people think about when they talk about raising money. Then and you might call that a friends and family or even a seed round. Then there's angel funding, which is typically you're raising money from a more seasoned investor. You've probably established a product market fit. You've probably gotten your first customer. You have a little bit of revenue coming in, and there's still not an easy way to value those type of companies. You can't point to any one metric that people look at. When you're raising money, typically the way you do it is you sell a stake in the company, and then those investors own the business just like you do. Mm-hmm. The value of the company versus the amount of money that they put into it determines how much of the company they own.
Right.
You may also use what's called a convertible note, which is where they lend you money and you pay interest back to them. And then if you raise equity later, then their debt converts into equity at some sort of multiple.
Yeah.
Whether you use debt or you use equity, at the end of the day, you're giving up control of the company.
Sure.
At that point. And again, it's still very difficult to value a company, which is why you might do a convertible instrument where you're saying, we're too early. I have one customer. They're paying me $20,000 a month. I don't know what this company's worth. I might have 20 customers in 6 months with the money that you're giving me. And then it's going to be a lot easier to value the company. At some point, you get to what's called a Series A investment or a VC investment, where you're going to a VC fund. And there you're probably getting into a better idea of how to value a company. It might not be revenue. It might not be EBITDA or net income. It might be based on number of customers. It might be based on growth. It could be number of followers on Twitter. I doubt it would be that, but it could be some other metric. But for different industries and different companies, the more sophisticated investors have metrics that they're going to use to value your business. And again, they're probably going to take an equity stake in your business. You're probably going to lose some control of the business. Sure. And at some point, you will get to where you're raising money from a private equity fund. And in most private equity businesses, they're looking at a relatively mature business with stable cash flows, stable income, and understood growth prospects that are pretty well understood. And the private equity fund is almost always going to come in and have some very strict valuation metrics. And so as you go further and further down the path of raising bigger and bigger amounts of money, in general, it becomes slightly easier to establish a valuation until you go to the public markets and do what's called an IPO. And that's always selling equity in the company. It's selling on public markets. It's being marketed by investment bankers and people who really understand business and really understand money.
Sure.
So, but it's the earlier you go, the more wild west the process is.
Sure. And I guess I think there are like two stages. One is get to the point where you can raise money and there are people willing to give you money. And that's what you hear on the news, and everybody happy because they raise money. But that's stage one. Now you need to overrun that, because you need to take that money and multiply it, as much as you can, because you need to return that money one way or the other.
Or eventually those investors are going to take over your business. That's the risk that you take in raising money.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think I think I was in that position that sometimes if we're not very educated about what that means, we think that, they got 20 million. We're like, they have 20 million in their pockets. No, not really.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the further along in the process of investing you go, there's a concept of taking chips off the table, which is where private equity investors will say, hey, if you want some money, we'll buy some of your shares. Normally what you do is you issue new shares in the company and it dilutes everybody. Mm-hmm. That's called putting money on the balance sheet. That money doesn't go to you, the owner. It goes to you running the business, but it's the business's money, the business's bank account. You're probably not taking any money out of that, but they may come to you and say, look, you own 500,000 shares. We want to buy 1 million shares, issue 500,000 new, or issue 800,000 new shares, and we'll buy 200,000 of yours. To them, they don't care how they get the shares. They want you to still own enough to be motivated though. Mm-hmm. So, but that's typically later on in the process of the business. When you read about a VC round, it's a very small amount of money that's being given to the owners. The investors, if they're smart, don't want you selling your car and moving into a bad neighborhood and eating ramen noodle and hot dogs. That they want you to have some measure of comfort, but they also don't want you driving a Ferrari and taking vacations to New Zealand for 6 months out of the year.
That makes sense. Tell me about what you're doing today with Defiance Ventures.
Sure. So with Defiance Ventures, we're building a portfolio of enterprise B2B SaaS businesses and a portfolio of services businesses that can support those companies and also third-party companies. So we own, for instance, the shirt that I've got on today is one of our first acquisitions. It's a product company called Tave. They sell security devices that a few very large banks use to secure their online banking. They do network management where they're monitoring traffic and directing it in the more efficient pathways. We own another business. It's a bond syndication platform that investment banks use. We're in the process of buying another piece of banking technology. We think of those as portfolio enterprise B2B SaaS offerings. Then we also own a consulting company called Defiance Digital, which can do digital transformation. It can do cloud architecture. It can do a lot of the software development and integration needs that our portfolio companies have, but it can also do it for other companies. So we're working with a handful of outside companies that Defiance has nothing to do with Defiance Digital. It allows us to build a scale of capability that we might not be able to achieve if we were only working for our own businesses. Yep. We own an ad agency called The Refinery House, which is the studio that we're coming from today on this podcast that does kind of the creative and branding work up front. So they'll come in and redo your website or build landing pages, create email marketing campaigns, social media marketing campaigns, similar to some of the stuff that you're doing for the brands in your business, if I understand your model correctly. Yeah. But we also do media buying, ad buying campaigns, that sort of thing with the Refinery House. We intend to either acquire or build a value-added reseller business that can go in to companies and help them understand why to buy a certain product. Same thing. We'll sell our own products. We'll sell other software company products with that business as well.
Yeah. One of the topics I wanted to cover today is prop tech, mainly because, this is, most of the audience of the Power of Design podcast, we're in the built environment, design professionals, construction, real estate. And I see that construction, real estate, and even design, they have been really lagging behind in terms of technology adoption.
And it's not only the construction and the contractors, it's the commercial real estate owners. These are billion-dollar businesses, multi-billion-dollar businesses, in some cases run by very, very wealthy, very, very sophisticated people, but they're not investing in technology largely.
Yes. And I think, one of the things is just the nature of the built environment, the architecture and spaces is just covering a basic need of shelter for humans, right? So as technology evolves, we develop bricks, we develop structures, steel, new materials, and we create these boxes when we go live in there and work and develop our lives. So it's still very basic, very raw. They're containers for life to happen. And technology is like that, the other very end of the spectrum, where it's very abstract. You cannot touch it. Mm-hmm. The benefits are not that tangible. And they're starting to integrate. And I know there have been some companies when they're now starting to track how do people use space, for example. So we can say like a typical conference room is used like 10 or 20% of the time. So we're starting to use technology to understand how to use space, because that's going to inform how do you design later. So what have been your relationship with prop tech? And I know you have worked with some companies in that area.
Sure.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't talk about it when we were talking about my history, but in between starting Defiance and stepping down from the day-to-day level, I have a friend named Rob Finlay who has developed 15 or 16 prop tech companies. He also owns a kind of boutique commercial real estate bank called Defiance Ventures, and now SOFR with these, as the industry is shifting from LIBOR to SOFR, and he sells derivatives and those sorts of things. And he also owns a pretty substantial portfolio of commercial real estate. And he asked me to run a data lake platform that my consulting company had helped him develop. And he was in the process of selling one of his prop tech businesses, Investor Management Services, IMS, which he sold to RealPage, which is one of the biggest prop tech vendors out there. They do all sorts of back office software for largely commercial real estate owners. Other investors can use some of the software in other asset classes, but it's largely for commercial real estate owners. And so I learned a pretty good bit about that side of the industry in the 7 or 8 months that I worked for Rob while he was selling one of his other businesses. With Lobby, the whole premise was that people are running these commercial real estate businesses, and even some of their lenders, based on relationships and gut feel. And that's fine until you have competitors who come in and leverage data and leverage digital technologies. And really what Rob's message is to everybody is, don't be the taxi cab companies who get clobbered by Uber. Mm-hmm. Yep. Don't be Blockbuster and get clobbered by Netflix. Leverage your data. You've already got it. You've spent a lot of money developing it. Figure out how to do something with it. And so we built while I was there, and they continue to build out capabilities to do what are relatively simple things in other industries. So for instance, we could take all of your repair history across your entire portfolio and look at what is the real cost of ownership for buying a washing machine or a dryer or any piece of equipment that is in your multifamily, for instance. Or if you're thinking of doing some repairs or buying or outfitting with new equipment, make a smarter decision based not just on what is the price right now and what can I finance it for, but also what am I going to really spend on this thing over time. He's got another report that he can show to companies where it says, what happens when weather changes to the number of people walking in, and how does that relate to your other marketing channels? Because obviously if you're a nursing home, you have people coming in to view the nursing home, and then they sign a lease or they don't. But you also might market through Facebook ads. You might market through billboards. You might market through other channels. You might pick up the phone and do calling campaigns or email campaigns. All of that is data that's being generated, but really you're probably not using it. And so he's got a report that pulls all of that in and then shows you the effectiveness and also shows you the correlations between weather and walk-in traffic, so that if you see that there's bad weather coming, you can say, does that actually impact walk-in traffic? Until you look at the data, you really don't know.
Yeah, you really don't know.
Yeah, you're just relying on what you think, your own biases, but data aren't biased.
Yeah, and I think there is a huge opportunity in the prop tech, specifically commercial real estate business, because as you said, the decisions are still being made based on relationships and gut feeling, which is fine and it's been working so far. But once you overlay data, it's just 100 times faster and better. One of the typical scenarios like I run into as an architect all the time is somebody wants to do a project or renovate a building, for example. they haven't invested on design, so there is nothing to price. They want to understand how much it's going to cost to bring the building up to code and, invest in some design features, and then coming up with a basic pro forma to understand, the return. And that's usually a lot of work from many people, architects, engineers, contractors, real estate brokers. And I see this incredible amount of professional man hours wasted because we're just chasing this data and it's not linked. And somebody says something, so they believe because he said that, but how do we really prove that? Yep. So I think there is a huge opportunity in that area to overlay technology.
Yeah, I agree. And I liken it to, have you seen the movie or read the book Moneyball?
No.
It's about the Oakland Athletics, and they wanted to compete with New York and Boston and Atlanta. These are teams that are owned by multi-billionaires in very big cities with very lucrative TV contracts, and they can just outspend Oakland. And Oakland brought in a very famous general manager. I think Billy Beane was his name, but I may be wrong on that. And he came in and he said, look, we're going to invest in data, and we're going to make decisions that are data driven. And in baseball, it's easy. Not easy, but it's relatively easy to get access to data. If you think about it, there's not one sport out there that's more synonymous with statistics. Batting average, on-base percentage.
Yeah.
Literally any statistic that you want, it's been crunched and you can buy that data. And he just took it and was building correlations to say, okay, we've got these pieces. What if we just change the shortstop?
We'll be right back with more from the Power of Design podcast.
The Power of Design podcast is brought to you by OSA Studio, a multidisciplinary design firm focused on creating impactful experiences through the power of design. We partner with our clients to create buildings, interior spaces, brands, and strategies that help you deliver a successful project. As a minority-owned firm, we are committed to building a diverse platform of curious and driven design professionals so we can together pursue our full potential. For more information, please visit us at www.osastudio.com.
Okay, what if we change the shortstop and the pitcher? Okay, what if we had these 4 pitchers and they made data-driven decisions and completely turned around the fortunes of the team while keeping their payroll? I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm going to guess it was 1/5 of what the Yankees spent in a given year. And the results were so staggering that Michael Lewis wrote a book, and then they turned it into a movie that had Jonah
Hill.
Jonah Hill was in it. Yep.
That's awesome. Tell me about you today, and I want to understand more about who you are as a person. What are the habits and things you do to keep yourself, learning, being engaged with your businesses, with your life, with making things happen, efficiency.
Sure. So there's a couple things there. For me, it starts with health. You have to be healthy and you have to be happy. And I don't think you can be happy without being healthy. So I'm very committed to fitness. I'm very committed to, and that can be exercise, that can be sauna, that can be taking cold showers, ice baths, eating well. I'm very careful about what I put into my body, but I'm also equally careful to what I put into my mind. So I like to listen to a lot of podcasts from a lot of different perspectives. I host my own podcast. I'd say I've probably learned more from that than just as much from that as my audience has, as I'm sure has been your experience. Sure. And you were kind enough to appear on my podcast as well. And I learned a lot there. But I think that what you put into your body and what you put into your mind are what you become. And so I'm very careful about both of those. I also think that exercise and putting the right things into your mind just helps to make you a happier person on a chemical level, on how you feel about yourself. So that all of that health and fitness is something that's very important to me, and also consuming very good content and being careful about the way I spend my time. It's too easy to do things that are fun, but then you feel lazy afterwards. And not to say that people aren't always going to have some measure of that, but I try to monitor it and say, did I really need to go do that last night? Now I feel like crap, and am I going to have a productive day today?
Oh yeah, that makes a big difference. One of the things that I always try to see is, the way you feel about yourself is going to be the lens through what you see the world.
Yep.
Right. So, taking care of your health, which, it's kind of easy to identify. This is not healthy. This is healthy. You know how you feel.
I say this as I sip on tequila.
Yeah. Keep going. That's good for you.
If you say so.
Yeah.
But Dr. also told me I could drink this.
Yeah. But the hard thing to me today with technology, social media, is to be careful of what you're consuming online, because it's just so easy. You just look at the screen and start scrolling, and you don't realize, but it's like you're eating the worst food for, 3 hours, and your mind gets stuff.
Yeah. And that's why for me, it's too easy to do that. And it's look, everybody likes to pull up Instagram and see what their friends are doing, or Facebook, or I think some degree of that is healthy, but I try not to follow things. And when I see friends online who are only posting about political issues or religion or always complaining, I just mute them. I just don't need to hear it.
Yeah.
My business partner, Tarek, and I, when we started putting Defiance together, his one rule of thumb was, I only want to be around people that I would like to have a drink with. So before we hire somebody, I want to have a drink with them.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that I like them. He's like, at this point in my career, that's all I want to work with. And I agree with that. And the way that I word it is, there's two ways that a person can energize a room: walking into it or walking out of it. If somebody energizes a room when they walk out, I don't want to work with them. Sure. I don't want to be friends with them. I don't want them in my life, period.
Yeah.
And so I'm very careful about those type of people, just not having anything to do with them. And as soon as I identify somebody who just pulls my energy, I just want nothing to do with them. But as soon as I find somebody who energizes me, and that's Tarek, that's a lot of the people who work at our company, I'm going to do everything I can to figure out how to work with those people.
Sure. And I think there is nothing wrong with having that attitude. I have the same mindset. I think we should, appreciate everybody and value every person for who they are. But it's very, very important to be very careful who you surround with, because everybody has an influence in you, whether you want it or not. And in my mind, I have no place for negativity in my mind or in my world. There is enough negativity in the world by itself, and in news and problems you come up with, during work time and everything, that you don't need to add anything extra. And when I'm interacting with people that for some reason, and there's nothing against the person, you don't know what they're behaving like that. But when they're adding an extra level of complexity to things, I don't need to deal with that. It's unnecessary.
I'm smiling because I feel like I could be called the chief simplifying officer of the company. That's how I feel at times. And I've been there. I've been there many times in my career where somebody has come to me and said, "You're making this way more complicated than it is." And it's frustrating when you're the person being told that, but sometimes it's hard to see that, hey, this simple is always going to be better. The simplest solution that can possibly get the job done, but not any simpler. Because if it's any simpler than that, it might not get the job done.
Yeah. Complexity is easy. You can make anything very complex very fast.
It's also fragile often.
Sure. But simplicity and getting to a common solution when you feel confident about it, that's a whole different thing. And it's interesting because I feel that as I get older and as I have more experience, the more simple I become. And usually the challenge when you're evolving is a challenge of detach yourself from a lot of trash that you've been consuming, consciously or unconsciously, and you just start getting to the very simple core idea and just focusing on what really matters.
I agree. But that's more easily said than done. I tell people it looks simple when Michael Jordan dunks. It doesn't mean it's easy. Simple doesn't mean easy. Simple just means you practice this a lot and you came up with a very elegant solution, but it's still hard to do it.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody, let's say in their 20s, who are listening to this and they say, wow, that sounds like an amazing story. I would love to do something like that. What advice do you give to that type of person?
I say first and foremost, seek out opportunities that optimize the things that really matter. And for me, what that meant was find the opportunity to work with really awesome people who are connected to other really awesome people and who will teach me skills. And I always say to people, young people especially, as long as you're growing your skills and you're growing your network and you're not suicidal from what you're doing or depressed all the time, you're in a good place and you're going to find yourself in a really good place. Don't go chasing a $2,000 a year raise, but leave a job where you're learning a lot. And I had so many offers while I was at Amentra, the startup that I joined that eventually was sold to Red Hat, and got job offers for 25% more money. And luckily I had a mentor drill this into my head that the amount of money that you make from your salary and your variable comp is nothing compared to what you're going to make if you put everything together and you go. For some people, it's go get a job at a top shelf investment bank and go make lots of money. For others, it's go build businesses and then sell them to other people with more money. And that's a much more rewarding financially model. And the way for most people to get there, in my mind or in my experience, has been grow your skills, grow your network.
Yeah. And that's also the compound effect of what you're learning. Sometimes we don't realize that, all the experiences we're having, whether at some moment in time, they might not be the best the best outcome we wanted, they're still adding to our tool set of skills and experience. And all that compound effect is going to start showing up someday. You realize that, and that comes out with experience. In my case, I feel sometimes, I'm also like you. I love to listen to podcasts. I'm always reading to interesting books. I'm very curious about new ideas, concepts, talking to you about technology. I love learning about all those things. And sometimes I feel like tired of consuming so much information. I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm overwhelmed with information. But it's interesting because and sometimes it even happens during podcasts where I come up with ideas and concepts that I didn't know I even had in my mind. And it's when all those ideas and concepts start connecting in your brain and you start generating your own knowledge based on all that research you have done before.
I couldn't agree more. And to me, that's why many times I'll look at a piece, like at a heading for a podcast or for an article that I want to read. I don't read a lot of newspapers. I barely read magazines other than The Economist. And even that I've tried to limit to some extent. But when I see something that I can't even put my finger on why I think so, but I'm like, I may learn something from this, or I may make a connection that I had never made before. And so I'm going to put the investment of my time into this. And I see that a lot, even in fiction books. I don't want to just read how-to books. I don't just want to read leadership books. I want to consume those, and I read those on a regular basis. But even fiction books, they have a way of opening up neural pathways that you didn't even know exist, and you make connections that you didn't even know were there before.
Yeah, that's very interesting. How about I want to learn about what you eat. Tell me about, you mentioned about eating healthy, and I'd love to learn more about that.
So my journey with healthy eating started really in my mid-30s. I was starting to gain weight and starting to lose energy, and my waist was starting to balloon, and I started to get tired walking upstairs. And I've always been what most people would call a gym rat, but I just didn't feel good anymore. And I started reading a lot about the paleo diet, and I just started eating paleo. And for those who don't know, they call it paleo. It's eating like the cavemen ate, which is kind of bullshit because you can't really eat the way cavemen ate. It's just impossible in modern society, but it's pretty valid in the sense that it looks at you should only eat natural foods. You shouldn't eat processed foods, whether it's processed meat or it's processed vegetables. Usually it's processed grains or legumes or dairy. A lot of those things humans just haven't caught up with from an evolutionary perspective. And so I ended up cutting out dairy. I ended up cutting out legumes. I ended up cutting out all grains. It's not a low carb diet, but when you cut out grains, it becomes a low carb diet. And so I experimented with a whole bunch of different macro combinations throughout my paleo journey. But largely speaking, to this day, I still eat mostly what people would call a paleo diet. It was interesting because at some point I ended up experimenting with a ketogenic diet, and it's pretty easy to do a ketogenic diet when you're on paleo. Keto is a diet where you get most of your calories from fat, some of your calories from protein, and very little calories from carbohydrate. And I actually do very well on a ketogenic diet. So you're eating a lot of avocados, a lot of coconut oil, a lot of healthy nuts and other healthy fats, little bit of protein. So you're trying to get 80% of your calories from fat. You're trying to get 15% from protein and 5% from carbohydrate. And I do very well on that diet, except that you have to cook for yourself.
That was going to be my follow-up question. So where do you get the food and how does like a typical breakfast or lunch look like?
Well, and that's the biggest component of my diet of what I eat has become more about when I eat than what I eat. And it turns out you can get into ketosis, which is what the ketogenic diet is trying to do, not by what you eat, but when you eat. And this is where you get into intermittent fasting. And I started intermittent fasting probably 6-7 years ago and have moved into longer term fasts. And the idea behind intermittent fasting is you skip breakfast. So you eat in a 16-hour window. I've experimented with 16, or you eat in an 8-hour window and you fast for 16 hours. So you might eat from noon until 8, and then you don't eat again until noon the next day, which again is usually just skipping breakfast or any morning snacks. For me, that gets you into ketosis, which gives you all sorts of health benefits, brain benefits. Blood sugar stays relatively flat. I wore a continuous glucose monitor called the Dexcom G6 for you staple it into your arm or into your stomach. I've worn those a couple times and you can just see what happens in real time to your blood sugar. And when you're in ketosis, it's very flat and you don't get the ups and the downs that are associated with eating a lot of sugar. And you burn a lot of fat because your body is inherently burning ketones instead of blood glucose because there is no blood glucose or there isn't enough. So I've experimented and gone all the way up to 5-day fasts. And I think that fasting is more important for my health and my happiness than the ketogenic diet or the paleo diet. Although I do eat within both of those, it's much more for me and it's much easier to do fasting. So ironically, when I talk about eating, a lot of times it's when I'm more about me not eating than anything else.
Yeah. No, I love the emphasis you have on your health and your eating, and you talk about paleo, like trying to be like a caveman, right? So it's like going way back to the past and the origins of humanity. But at the same time, look, you're way in the future in technology. Yeah. So you're like at the both ends, stretching yourself to become more robot-like, but also more human. Maybe you're trying to become more human because you're becoming a robot in the technology world.
Maybe I'm just a walking contradiction, Jack.
That's right. Maybe you're just an artificial intelligent cyborg.
Hey, I think we're all cyborgs with these phones.
Oh, sure, man. That's good to good segue because I've been having a lot of conversations lately where people are very concerned about privacy. Mm-hmm. And I say the moment you decide to use a smartphone, you gave away your privacy long time ago.
I couldn't agree more. And look, I think the boundaries of privacy that we're willing to trade for convenience are changing. And I wouldn't be surprised if 20 years from now, we have no expectation of privacy. And I don't think that I'm equipped to judge that, whether that's a good or a bad thing. It seems like a bad thing, but sometimes change is for the better, and things that seem unthinkable this is just the way that they are. But we seem to be moving the direction where, look, if you ask me, I buy half of my sneakers from the gym, or that I wear at the gym, from Instagram. And I've traded privacy for them to give me very good targeted ads. Instagram knows what I want to buy and when I want to buy it. And for me, I like that. Yeah. Some people are creeped out by it. I don't know that most people really understand that it's creepy, but you're signing up for this and you can change this if you want.
Sure. And well, what's interesting is that they're giving you what you want, but that's not what they're selling. Yeah. What they're really doing is getting all the data, mm-hmm. which is what's worth, what Facebook, Google, Instagram are doing is they're getting all your data because they want to understand your behavior. They want to really understand how you think. And I think I heard this in a podcast or in a book, I don't remember, where they're doing that. So some days one day they're going to collect so much data on you that they're going to be able to replicate who you are and how you make decisions. So even if you have a job, they're going to go to your employer and say, hey, I'll offer you the same talent for half of the price because we can replicate that. And I even heard that, I don't know if we'll get there, but talking about privacy, there's going to be a point where we have given so much of our privacy away that there's going to be just two types of people in the world. People who are wealthy enough to pay to protect their privacy and people who just are slaves to others owning their privacy.
Well, and we see this already where people will trade their time for money, and it generally is somebody with more money and less time that orders gets an Uber driver, and the Uber driver generally values the money more than they value their time. But we see that with, if you go into these blood plasma centers where they'll buy your blood plasma, it's very rare that you see people with a lot of money going in there, but it does benefit the wealthier people because they're developing drugs and antibodies and treatments for largely wealthy people. And, I get less caught up in whether that's right or wrong. I'm not smart enough to know whether it's right or wrong. I just think it's interesting to see the business models that get created as a result. I will say on the privacy front, that I just think I'm okay for me personally with getting better, more targeted ads based on what I'm willing to share with somebody. And I think because I'm a fairly sophisticated technology consumer, I understand that. I don't know if it's fair for other people, and especially for kids who aren't educated enough to make that decision. And it's on the parents to try to make those decisions. But again, many parents don't even see what's going on. Where it gets to me ugly is when you see algorithms on Facebook and YouTube, especially, that are just saying, I need to get more clicks. And it's a purely machine thing, and it's a purely human thing that we happen to click more on things that piss us off. And so you see a lot of just anger out there on social media and a lot of echo chambers. And as a technologist, it's natural. That's what the algorithm should do. If what we're trying to optimize is to get you spending more time in the app. So again, for me, that's a bad outcome. When all I see is one opinion, when all I see is stuff that gets me riled up and makes me angry and makes me hate my neighbor, that's a bad application of technology. Now, we can argue, you can say that it's not good for them to be able to target ads. And I think that's a perfectly rational argument, but I don't know if any of us would argue that it's a good thing to make neighbors hate one another because we just want to generate more clicks. But I don't know how you stop that, because that's human nature. We engage with what we hate, right? Yeah.
And technology, it's so well designed that they appeal to basic human needs. So that's why we immediately engage with it. We don't think about it, and we love it. I mean, we love it. It's awesome. And I think it's going to take like a new generation of humans that they have a very clear understanding of what technology is, and their brain has been trained to compensate for that. So you understand, okay, everything I see here, I understand is not the truth. A lot of these things have been created to manipulate my mind, and I'm not going to believe that part. I'm just going to take the small percentage that I think it adds value to my life. And I am driving here. The technology is not driving.
I agree. And I think largely we as a society are flying blind on a lot of social media and privacy questions, because a lot of problems that we're confronted with are things that humans have been facing for 25,000, 50,000 years, and our genes have evolved to deal with those things. So we know how to deal with a storm coming, or we know how to deal with temperature changes, or we know how to deal with, I went into the mountains and there's, at a higher altitude, there's less oxygen, because it's something that we've seen. But YouTube didn't exist in 2006.
Yeah.
We don't know how to deal with YouTube. We don't have laws that can, and usually technology changed at a pace where society could set norms and mores and laws and have some time to catch up. We don't have time to catch up. When YouTube, which is such a part of everybody's life, if you think about that it didn't exist until 14 years ago. If you think about the iPhone didn't exist until a couple of years later. There weren't smartphones before that could track with GPS precision. And And there's all, how long ago did TikTok really become a thing? There are all these things that we haven't had time to figure out the right way to interact with. And my hope is that we can catch up. But the flip side is technology changes faster and faster and faster. And that's my biggest concern as a technologist is, do we just get so far apart between the two that the technology stops serving us? Because today, even all the technology we have today serves us. But, Terminator 2, I think there's some flaws in the thinking behind what society's turned into there. But it is something that needs to be thought about. Does this get to be too fast to where our evolution can't keep up with it? I don't know the answer to that.
Are we in the Matrix or not?
That's a whole nother question.
Yeah, I know. Don't go there. It's too big. Yeah, no, I love that conversation because technology, I always think about is technology, and we talk about when you had me on your podcast, is technology making us more human or less human? Mm-hmm. But we are the ones creating technology.
Yep.
It's coming out from humans. So maybe that's where we want to go. I don't know.
I agree. And I think that there have been arguments from the beginning of time that technology is making humans worse. And in general, the path has been in the right direction. But like anything, it's not a purely linear path. Things get better, they get worse. And then eventually you figure them out. I do worry that some things have moved too fast and we're just not ready. I look at signing on to Twitter during an election year is the stupidest thing I ever have done. And yet I do it every day. Right? I do wonder, I just see people where I'm like, they're abusing Twitter the way that people abuse drugs and they don't even know it. And nobody around them knows it. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but it feels like it's doing the same thing that cocaine or heroin or other bad drugs can do to people. Yeah. But we can't see it. At least with those drugs, it becomes evident pretty quickly. I don't know that it's as evident what long-term damage we're doing to ourselves with some of our social media habits.
Yeah. So, John, I know since you were born up until today, you have had a great journey and probably found a lot of surprises, things that make you happy and excited about your view learn. What do you hope to be the rest of your life from now till the future?
Well, I hope that it's one of continual learning and continual challenges. I don't want a life of pure comfort. I like to buy things and create conditions that make me comfortable. I like to vacation. But I think that I also like challenges and I like things that I don't know how to overcome. And as long as those are productive things that we're doing that aren't harming me, like I hope to engage in more of that throughout my life. I hope to spend more time with my family. I hope to continue to build things, but I can't stress it enough. For me, there's just a joy in learning new things and trying things that I'm not good at and getting better at them, whether that's hobbies or businesses or philanthropy. I suspect that as my station in life changes, hopefully for the next 40, 50 years. I'm 44 years old. Hopefully that changes over time, but hopefully it's always moving towards teaching me new things and challenging me in ways that I've not been challenged before.
Well, I agree with all that. John, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you, coming on my podcast. I really appreciate getting to know you, and I look forward to stay in touch and getting to know you better.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. I've really enjoyed it. I look forward to future collaborations for sure. And I hope that, I hope that we can get our audience kind of listening to one another's podcasts, because I think a lot of the things you talk about, even though you're coming at it from a different angle, I think we come to a lot of the same conclusions. So thank you for doing what you do.
Sure, man. Thanks.
All right. Cheers.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Power of Design podcast. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Find out more about Jack and Osa Studio at osastudio.com and follow us on Instagram at The Power of Design Podcast. Thank you.